to be here. She must have meant something to you. So in memory of Mom, we are going to have some time that Keith is going to manage for me, for everyone to have the opportunity to share in Elaine's story. And I'm hoping that I walk away from this, along with Andrew, maybe knowing a few things at the end of the day about my mom, more than I knew at the beginning, because there are chapters of her life that I wasn't there for. But many of you were. And again, thank you for making the effort to be here today. We have hopefully a program that highlights some of the things that were important to Mom, music and family being the two most important pieces. So on behalf of Dad and Andrew and myself, thank you for coming. And thank you to so many of the family members who have agreed to be part of today's program. With that, Tom, if you will lead us in prayer.
Well, Sonia said, would I do a prayer? And I said, sure, Sonia, I know how to do that. But first I would like to say, just look around at who's here today. Just take a look. We have here a room full of people who cared. We have a room full of friends mixed with family who all interacted and cared about my sister's life. So I had thought I could do this without any. It's okay, Sonia, I'll make it.
You can do this, Tom.
So I will give you a prelude to my prayer. And you all will recall in the story of Jesus showing up at Lazarus' tomb about 4 days after he died. And if you reread that story, I won't go into great detail, but I will remind you that Jesus' words to the sister there were, your brother will live again. And even knowing what he would be doing in just a few minutes, he cried. Shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And you say, well, why would he cry? He knew what he was about to do. He cried because of death and the great sorrow and the great commonality. And while we all die, it is the life that is important. And so he cried for you and he cried for me as we mourned the loss of one that we cared for and loved. But on that day, with the resurrection of Lazarus, he also confirmed a promise that he later made when he said that the day is coming. Excuse me. The day is coming when those that are his who sleep in the dust will rise again. So given that, what is my prayer? It's short, and it goes like this. Lord, thank you. Amen.
Steve, you ready to follow that? As in life.
So Sonia sent out some text when we were going to do this and said, here's a list of things, would you be willing to do anything? And the first one was sing. And I can guarantee you guys that's not the one you want. And then she said, how about prayer? And I said, I don't know about that one. And then I said, but I can do a Bible text. So then I started looking at text, and I actually did think about the one that Tom mentioned, John 11:35, and I said, well, that's probably not going to work real well. It's pretty short. And then I started looking at the text I liked, and I said, well, that's not going to work either, because all the text I like really, aren't going to go well either. But so the other thing is, so this is just as you guys are out there, think about Because there may come a time when you need a favorite Bible text, and it'd be good to be able to know what that is so you can tell somebody about what that Bible text is so they can read it for you. Because I ended up with about 4 different texts that were some of Elaine's favorite texts, and probably go with the time here. But then the deal was is I don't read all these. I just, one's enough. But so one of these is 1 Thessalonians 4:14 through 18. And it goes, "For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will with God bring it with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which remain alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall ever be with the Lord." And verse 18, "Wherefore comfort one another with these words," or something to look forward to.
Thank you, Steve. Along with asking Tom and Steve, where they would like to be in part of remembering Mom's life and finding places that hopefully they felt happy being part of, I also asked George and Thelma, as the individuals who are with us today who might have known Mom the longest, if they would present some of the pieces of her life that probably coincide with where most of us in this room met Mom at some point in her life's journey. George and Thelma? I think George here. Thelma, do you want a handheld?
We're just going to stand.
Okay.
I know most of you are not as old as I am, but when you get to be my age, you have to have lots of light to see. Margaret Elaine Gibb Andreassen was born to Earl Gibb and Mackie Law Gibb, May 21, 1946, in Columbia, Missouri. Elaine was the first of Earl and Mackie's 4 children and spent her childhood, elementary, and high school years on the family West Winds property, raising chickens, tapping sugar maple trees, playing in the woods, along with her brother Larry. She was part of a 25-plus year tradition of elementary education, Gibb style, which ensured many Gibb, Limerick, Rogers, Chapman, Fountain, Poff-related children were raised in faith, along with learning, reading, writing, multiplication tables, and scriptures at the Columbia SDA Church School. After the Earl Mackie Gibb grew to include Tom and Steve, the family moved to Mary Lee Drive and became part of the Mary Lee Drive development chapter that including building homes for George and Lois Chapman, George and Betty Gibb, Earl and Mackie Gibb, Edwin and Macy Gibb, and this was in the late 50s and the early 60s. And then later on, a house was built on the same street by Steve and Linda Gibb.
Elaine continued the family tradition of attending Sunnydale Academy, meeting her future husband, Ross Andreassen, and building many friendships that extended into college and through the rest of her life. Some of you are here: Bonnie Laskonic, Donna Burgesson, Linda Rogers, Lana March, Rod Satterley, and many others. After graduation from Sunnydale Academy as part of the class of 1964, I'm just going to put in here, when Elaine was at Sunnydale, she was the baker. And some of you who can remember back that far, she she baked all the bread, and she made the cinnamon rolls that were kind of a tradition at Sunnydale for Friday night and Sabbath morning. Anyway, after graduation in 1964, Elaine married Ross on June 27, 1965, here in the Columbia SDA Church, and pursued her degree in education, ultimately obtaining a permanent certificate in elementary education from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She also, I think, attended university in Rolla and maybe in Joplin, or was that where she taught? She taught in Joplin? Okay. Summer camp was an important part of Elaine's life. First as a camper at Camp Mojan, which was I think it was a Girl Scouts camp that we rented. And then later on, she worked in the kitchen at Camp Heritage. And so those were important parts of her life. During her lifetime, she lived and or traveled both across the U.S. and internationally, with her first international trip being to Germany and Western Europe with her mother-in-law, Edna Andreassen, after Ross's military tour.
After settling back in Columbia, Missouri, Elaine and Ross welcomed their children, Sonia in 1971 and Andrew in 1973, balancing strong Columbia SDA church commitment with work, raising their children, and being part of a large, busy, extended Gibb clan and church family. Throughout Elaine's life, a love of her church, family, friends, and music, along with her desire to help others, have been defining and constant elements. Elaine was known for her smile, and we all remember her smile, voice, and warmth. She enjoyed meeting others and seemed to never meet a stranger, and welcomed others into her life and home. You could most always find Elaine at camp meeting and Sunnydale alumni weekends. As part of her life's journey, Elaine joined Ross in Oregon, Alaska, Montserrat from 1989 to 1992, and returned to her early calling in education by teaching elementary education in Montserrat and expanding her love of writing to include writing children's stories based on some of her experiences while in Montserrat.
While Ross focused on completing his medical residencies and transitioned to his full medical practice, Elaine continued to expand her church and community involvement, with the last 20-plus years being at West Plains, Missouri, where Ross and Elaine worked closely with Tom and Gayla on church expansion and sharing the message of health, love, and redemption through Christ. Elaine, with the support of tireless assistance of Ross, also developed a beautiful, peaceful space along the North Fork of the White River, which she called Marlane's Meadow, where she welcomed anyone who wanted to respectfully camp, canoe, and enjoy the river. She loved nature. She loved trees and flowers. Just within the last few years, the city decided that the property up here on the hill, which was the love of her life, it was where she spent her growing up years, they decided that that would be the perfect place to put a hiking trail through it. And Elaine was very determined that they weren't going to have a hiking trail through her property. So she went to battle on it. And at this point, I think the hiking trail has been stopped. We'll see what happens in the future. While living in West Plains, Elaine continued to spend time with family and enjoying life, including visiting Sonia in London when she was working over there, and celebrating her one of her birthdays in 1907 in Thailand. And from what I understand, it took 10 or 12 family members in 2 weeks to get Shannon home from Thailand, she'd been over there and going to college for 2 years. Anyway, I guess it made a good excuse to go have a vacation. She tackled Machu Picchu And she supported Andrew's building projects in Washington and Sonia's gardening and landscaping and efforts in Chicago. Elaine will be remembered for her commitment to the church, dedication to her family, warmth and generosity, her singing, she loved to sing, and her smile, having touched so many lives. She passed away at home in West Plains on February 25, confident in her belief in everlasting life through faith in Jesus and ready to meet her Savior.
Thank you so much. Keith, you're up, man. But this is the participation part of the conversation. We tried to build some of the items into our life sketch that, again, allow each of you to remember where you intersected with Mom and where she might have touched your life, because, again, you've chosen to be here for a reason. So, Keith, please encourage them to share that.
So I'm looking around the room and doing a quick head count, and I think if we all take 4 minutes, we can easily get out of here by 8:30 or so. You know, each one here has some memory of Elaine. I know I do. And it's an opportunity for those of you who want to. There's no pressure to do this, but anyone who wants to simply raise their hand. I'll bring the mic to you, and you can say a few words. I do have a bit of a vision problem, so if you raise your hand and I don't see you, shout at me or something, and I will come get you. Who wants to kick it off?
Is this on? It's on. I first met Elaine our freshman year at Sunnydale Academy. My mother and Elaine's mother had met in their youth when they had activities between Jefferson City Church and Columbia Church, and that's where they had met. So registration day in 1960, they ran into each other, and so each said, "Oh, you have a daughter here?" "Yes, I have a daughter here." "Does she have a roommate?" "No, she doesn't have a roommate." So that's how we became roommates. We roomed together for 4 years in academy, then 1 year in college. Then after that, Elaine got married, so that ended the roommating days. But as mentioned, she loved to sing, so many times there was a piano in the lobby of the girls' dorm, and she'd say, "Come and play for me. I want to sing a new song, or I want to learn something." So we would do that. So her voice is silent right now, but one day she will sing with the angels.
Amen.
Elaine and I were actually only 6 months apart in age, and we should have been best friends, but because I grew up in other countries, we didn't spend a lot of time together. However, we did have some adventures together. Elaine is the second of 23 first cousins, and just for the fun of it, I wish all her first cousins would stand up. And her brothers, come on. So you can see we loved Elaine. We're here today. I've been looking at the urn, and Elaine was a free spirit, so I love the dragonfly. And Elaine loved nature, especially the property on which she grew up. And we spent a lot of time walking that property back in the woods on land that was later developed, and that really upset Elaine. We also spent time, my husband and I, and our 2 boys, boating with Ross and Elaine, Sonia, and Andrew. I don't know if you remember it. You were very small. Diving under the boat just about gave me a heart attack, counting heads. Elaine was special. She had such a loving smile, always seemed so happy. It was my privilege to be her cousin.
Who else? Help me out.
I grew up about 5 miles from the campus of Sunnydale Academy, and my parents were members of the Sunnydale Church. So I went to Academy with Elaine all 4 years in the year she was at Union. But my first memory of Elaine is one time, I don't remember why, but I was probably about 9 years old. My folks visited church in Columbia, and Elaine's family invited us over for Sabbath dinner. And I can just remember the fun, my two sisters and I playing in the woods after dinner with Elaine and Larry. And that's my first memory of Elaine, and it's always been a very pleasant memory. A lot of years went by, and Elaine and Ross started coming up to Sunnydale for various activities. And I was close to the academy, and so was my sister Donna. And even though they had plenty of family in Columbia that would have been glad to host them, they preferred to stay at our place because it was so handy to go to something at the academy. And one time I remember she needed a place to stay, and my husband and I were going to be in Europe visiting his family, but she stayed there anyway and just made herself at home. And we always looked forward to Elaine and Bella and sometimes Ross coming and staying with us. And we're going to miss Elaine coming and staying at our house. And Ross and Bella, you are still welcome to come and stay with us. And that's something that I'm going to miss. Elaine was just a very easy guest to host, and I'm going to miss that a lot.
Well, my twin sisters stole about everything I was going to say. I just want to say Elaine was a fun person. She had a free spirit. She was just fun to be around. You never had a dull moment when Elaine was around because she was always so warm and friendly and had such a fun spirit. I remember her singing. I remember on our track and field days how I always envied Elaine. She was the runner in our class, how she could do stuff. She was just such a fun person to be around. I always enjoyed when Ross and Elaine and Bella came to stay with us, when they came up here to the area to do the things at Sunnydale, and she's going to be greatly missed.
Hello, I'm Dave Roman. My wife is Kathy, and she's Ross's baby sister, I guess. And I've been in the family about 29 years, and Elaine was always beautiful and accepting, very nice to me, and I really loved her. But why I felt like I had to say something, in 2005, we almost lost Kathy. She was in the hospital for over 60 days. And right when I got home, I had to go back to work finally. And I was really stressed because she was really still needing care. And she came down to St. Louis, stayed a week, and organized another one of our friends. She was all involved in helping me survive the situation. And I'll never forget her for that. And she was so wonderful, and Ross sacrificed too, because he was, she's not there, and so I appreciate that so much to this day, and that's what I felt like saying.
I probably don't need this. Yeah. I do need it. Oh my, that's loud. Maybe I need it. Well, Elaine was an adult, I grew up with her, and she made the effort. Yeah, wow. Yeah. She made the effort. Thank you. And I'm a dad now. And I'm not a kid anymore. And it means so much, man. It means so much more now And I thank her and this family for the effort that we have put into each other so much. And I can't share a story. There's so many. There's so many. And she chose to be a part. And she made the effort to come down to 63 acres in the middle of nowhere, like so many of you guys did, to be a part of my family, so many times. And I appreciate her for that.
So, honesty is hard, but here you go. When I knew Mom lost a will for singing, I knew life was going over. And so I knew Mom had stopped eating. I knew it was time. Go see Mom. So Sonia talked and said, all right, you're going down. I'll meet you down there. I don't want to do it, but I'll go do it. So we went down there, had a nice weekend, conversation, had prayer goodbye, and I cried. When Dad called, Mom's gone. I said, okay. Haven't cried since then. My story. So, a lot of you know, some very intimately, that I like fire. So, in high school, boys have less parental supervision. So, I decided to make a smoke bomb in the house. So, those who know these things, a standard smoke bomb recipe does not burn very well. So you must add another ingredient, which are match heads. The catch is if you cook it too fast, the match heads ignite. So I'm cooking this concoction in the kitchen, and it catches on fire. I fill the house to the floor in smoke. I managed to get the smoke bomb, which is on fire, shooting fireballs, small fireballs, out of the house and outside. Mom was home, and we then spent the next couple hours getting the house aired out. So it burned black spots in the windowsill, it burns black spots on the cabinet, and it burned small pit marks in the pots above the stove. Mom wasn't mad, other than I had damaged the pots in the stove. Of all the things she could have really cooked my hide on, it was those pots had little black marks on the top of the stove. That was Mom.
She let us get away with a lot, actually.
She did. But I would agree with Jesse. It's interesting how I go from being a child to an adult and now older age, and priorities shift around. I'd say my goodbyes. It was just easier for me to just kind of close the door and walk away. But I know closure is important. And so I thank you all very much for your involvement in my life, my mom's life, and the chance to come together and say hi and love each other, because family is what we have. You know, it shapes us so much. You know, the interconnections are awesome. And it's a chance to say, enjoy the joys of life. You know, enjoy most of the passion.
It's been mentioned a couple of times, but the West Winds property that we've mentioned is just behind the church. It's up the hill. And when Grandpa passed away, I told Mom I wanted the property. I remember walking up the hill to Pam and Larry for piano lessons. You can judge me later for that. And as we talked about maple syrup tapping, and I remember the wildflowers, and I just have such fond memories of that 10 acres. So Mom transferred it to me with the support of Andrew and Dad about a year ago. And so we are working to see if we can, replace the chicken coop and potentially build another house up there while still retaining the farmhouse that she grew up in, that Larry grew up in, that Tom and Steve apparently also spent some time in, and so many other family members have been on that property over the years. So we're trying to work through city processes, but trying to make sure that I continue, as many of you know, Mom's love of the trees and the wildlife. And I'm looking forward to walking through those woods for many years to come, looking for the Dutchman's breeches and the spring beauties and the trilliums and the bloodroots, and being, Mom, what was that again? So hopefully we'll be able to continue preserving so many of the trees there for her in her memory. I know there have also been people who've talked about wanting to contribute. And so when we had the blessing of some time with Mom to talk with her about what she wanted, I asked her, what's your favorite tree? What's your favorite flower? What's your favorite color? Some of these things that as a kid, you never, when do you ask your parent about their favorite flower? But it was pink and white roses, and it was hard rock maple. And so we'll be trying to plant a couple of hard rock maples up there, which, as I'm told, are also basically sugar maples that you use for tapping sugar maple. So we will continue to try to invest in Mom's memory in many ways. Was that what you wanted, Andrew?
Okay, I'm Rachel Gibb, new, Jesse's sister, Tom's daughter. And my memory of Elaine that I wanted to share, you mentioned in her life story that they had spent time in Montserrat and that she wrote children's stories. And she made a book of her own illustrations and text for my sisters and I. And when she would come visit on holidays, we would always pin her down and make her read her stories to us. And if you've ever read these stories, you really have to have Elaine's voice to read them. The clicking noise and the clacking noise and Gus the donkey and his brays. And when she was able, she made a VHS tape of her recorded voice reading those stories to us. So Ricky and I, and Molly was quite a bit younger, but we would flip the pages and see her beautiful artwork of Montserrat and hear her voice always doing this. So there are some things that will not fade from my mind about Elaine. One is her voice when singing, her voice when reading these stories. And then I spent a year at the Westman's property when I was in college renting from Elaine, so she was also my landlord. And so I got to know her kind of differently as a college kid, and she was just a wonderful aunt. I like right on with what Jessie said. She put in the effort. She made the time. Every time she could be with us, she would come up and give us a side hug and ask, how are things? How are you? Checking in on the level. So thank you everyone for sharing and being here and helping us to remember so much about Elaine.
One more over here.
So 3 really fast ones. First of all, the now legendary status of haystacks worldwide, I really think Elaine is at least 20% responsible for. We had, when I was going to school right over here, every Wednesday was hot lunch, and I don't know how she got strapped with doing it every week. I don't know if everyone bailed or what, and most people would just say, she did it every Wednesday, and every Wednesday it was haystacks. And it took me a long time to notice that it was haystacks every Wednesday, and I even came to really, really appreciate diluted sour cream because she could stretch it further if she'd add some water or milk to it. And to this day, it's the only way to eat haystacks is with some real creamy sour cream, and that was Elaine. Point 2, when she was in Montserrat, she wrote these amazing letters and full of all the things she was doing. It was so exciting, and half of everything she wrote was just really, really cool to see and imagine. You felt like you were there. The other half was probably better, but to this day, we can't decipher what it said. Her handwriting was so bad, we couldn't tell. And so what we could read, we were really proud when we'd figure out a paragraph. Right, yeah.
Even our kids had the same problem.
Yes. And so I'm sure the other half is actually the stuff of novels, and one day we'll find out what she actually meant. And the last piece, in 2009, I was at a conference in Chicago. You all were out of town. I think you made plans when you found out I was coming into town, but you let me stay at your house. And Elaine was house sitting, and we got in the car to go to the grocery store, and I'm driving, and Chicago traffic, and she tells me it's clear, and I go, and we almost get in a wreck. And then she tells me she's having major eye problems. And so those are my 3 quick ones.
Yeah.
Well, my story is a lot less time. We moved to Missouri 7 years ago, and I did church hopping at 3 different cities to find the church that I felt was right. And the first time I walked in, it was Elaine and Tom I met, and I did not know Tom and her were related until she got sick. When she got sick and the one brother came, then I found out her name was Gibb. I never knew it. 7 years, I didn't know she was a Gibb. I just knew her the way she was. But she had this quality about her that I haven't heard anybody else say anything about. But I could have a smile on my face, and she could walk up to me and know something was wrong. And she would give me a hug, and she would ask me, "What's going on?" And she was like a big sister to me. I felt like I could tell her things, and I knew she wouldn't tell anybody else. And I could share heartaches or problems I was going through, and she was always there, always there. And when I was having a good day, she knew my good days. And then when I started my card ministry, she and Ross have backed me and supported me and brought cards to me to help with my card ministry. And she was a good friend. I didn't go to see her all the time like some people, but on my weekends, I knew she was there. So that's all I've got to say.
I knew Elaine as a person of, shall we say, extreme compassion. I hope to have 1/10 of that compassion. And she is the only person I know that would mow around a Russian thistle just because it's pretty. Yes. But it helps. I've done enough funerals to really come to appreciate that text in Psalms 116. It says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints."
I was vexating on what story to share about Elaine. I've got stories about great-grandmother's Thanksgiving dinner and propping up 2x4s under floor joists to carry the load of people. I had stories about her laughter, how she was a social butterfly who couldn't walk a straight line through a room without visiting with everyone along the way. The story I want to share with you is her hug. My mom was a dance instructor, right? And so her biggest point for me as her son was to give a firm handshake. That was really important to her. But what I noticed as a child was how my mom would hug her colleagues who were in the performing arts. And it's just like the movies. You stick your tushy out, you reach around and you pat, and you tell them how beautiful they are. But over time, I had endeared myself to Elaine, and she gave me the first real hug I ever had. We're talking a full contact sport here. She put I leaned in for the hug, but she put those arms around me and pulled me close and tight, and she wouldn't let go. And I stiffened up, but I realized I couldn't escape. And so I hugged back, but she wasn't done yet. And I can tell you as a scientist, when you give a good hug, you're releasing serotonin, oxytocin, all of these happy hormones that are actually showing you that you're loved, appreciated, and cared for. And that's what I'm going to miss the most, is those hugs from Elaine.
So I have one last memory of Elaine. It involves her love of music and the fact that every once in a while at some big family function here at the church, someone would have the bad idea of organizing a Gibb men's choir. And Elaine crashed it every time and improved the quality of the music by a wide margin. Thank you so much for sharing your memories.
One more.
Okay, you got one more.
A lot of you, I'm Andrew's wife, A lot of you have mentioned that she was a free spirit. And Andrew and I built a house in Nebraska, and he had just freshly seeded the yard and was working really hard to make this beautiful grass yard. Second time because the weather had killed it the first time. And Elaine had found some milkweed, and she had the milkweed pod. And she was walking through Andrew's freshly sown yard and freely spreading the milkweed seeds all over his yard. And Andrew very politely went out and said, "Please stop. I've put a lot of effort into this yard." And she did, but that's how I'm going to remember her, very freely sowing seeds of milkweed.
And she went back and picked them up.
Got the last word for the family?
Yeah, okay, so big sister, right? 7 years older than I am, and you all know how big sisters are. They've always got the little baby on their hip, and she took good care of me, right? So one day they were she and Larry were taking good care of me, and Dad was driving a Hudson. I don't know how many of you out here remember what a Hudson even looks like. Yes, okay. Pay attention to the pictures, you might see it. Dad drove a Hudson, and we had a big dog, a big mutt dog with lots of hair, and they would set me on this dog and discovered that this dog could carry this. I don't know if I was 1.5 years or 2.5 years old. I was born in March, so this would have been at least 1.5 years, but maybe 2.5, I don't know. But this is my very first memory. Anybody out here, think back, what is your very first memory? Well, here's my very first memory. This dog, Buck, loved to chase Dad when he left the house in the Hudson. And Larry and Pam decided if we could tie little Tommy on that dog, sorry, Larry and Elaine, boy, wouldn't he enjoy that? And so they put a gunny sack for a saddle, and I don't know how they got the dog to cooperate with any of this, but you know, he was used to being led around a little bit with some weight on him because they'd already tried that out. And then they put me on, and they tied my feet together underneath the dog. And then they held on to the dog until Dad was a good ways down the road, and they turned the dog loose. Now, the driveway was just, the limestone gravel driveway. So it was not more than 2 or 3 leaps, because they gave a little shove with me so I could keep up with the initial acceleration. This is like a rocket taking off. And I, with feet tied together, the dog came out, the gunny sack came out, and the diaper came off. And I remember Elaine picking me up and brushing the rocks and the dust off of me, all of my parts, and pulling the diaper back up and telling me, "You're okay."
Okay, Tom, that one was worth waiting for. Thanks. Well, thank you to everyone for helping to share some memories. I do think Andrew and I walked away with a few stories we probably didn't know going into this, so thank you. Dean, will you take us forward, please?
With your memories, you've stolen a lot of my thunder. But I want to say I am so thankful that you have the pictures. So often we come to an event like this and we only remember the person in their later years and forget that they were young and vivacious and full of life, and with the pictures we can see this. So thank you. It's hard looking at Elaine's life without it being about her family because it was so interwoven. And growing up as the teacher's daughter, this very much affected both Larry and Elaine in their later life. As it was pointed out, Elaine was the second child of 23 grandkids of Arthur and Mary Lee Gibb. She was the first girl grandchild, and she lived very near Grandma and Grandpa. So she was special. She grew up here in the Columbia Seventh-day Adventist Church, surrounded by family. I was about a year younger than Elaine, and so we grew up together. As it was pointed out, Elaine's father was the elementary school teacher. He was very much wanting the school to be a success and to help it in any way possible. So he used his, I think it was essentially a new Hudson at the time, as a school bus. And he would start picking up kids as they left home. The time they got to school, the back seat was frequently, well, this is 4 seat belts, and the back seat was stacked too high, at least, almost this. And this was the kind of life that Elaine, just grew up. That was what you did. It was very much of a family school. Not only was her father the teacher, but she had 2 uncles that were going to school there, George Gibb and John Law. Thelma was an aunt. We never considered her that way. She was more of a cousin, but, And then she had many cousins. And then there was other family that wasn't maybe completely related, but very close. And so it was a family school. My parents lived on the east side of town, kind of from the other side from the rest of them. And they had 1 car. And Dad sometimes had to work late. And so I ended up at Elaine's house. And sometimes for the night. And we had great fun playing together. Larry and Elaine and I roamed the woods and just enjoyed going out and finding the wildflowers and maybe the mushrooms and edible berries if possible, whatever was out there. And being the teacher's daughter, she was involved in a lot of the activities at a very early age. There were campouts. Now, Uncle Earl was the teacher, but he did far, far more than being the teacher. And so there were campouts, there were hikes, there were special projects, and oh yes, Christmas caroling. And Elaine loved Christmas caroling a lot more than some of the rest of us did. Also, being the teacher's daughter, she got involved with some of the other activities. In fact, all of the people who rode in the car got involved with those activities because on Friday, we had to get our schoolroom ready for Sabbath school on Sabbath because we were in the Sexton Road Church, and it was a little church, and the school was held in the back room. So that involved pushing all of the desks back in the corner, setting up the chairs, cleaning the church, and for some of the older boys, we had a non-motorized push mower, and we had to go out and mow the yard. Now that isn't as bad as it might sound because there wasn't much yard there. Even our playground, we could hit a home run with a wiffle ball. So it was always a challenge. But this was part of life with her dad. When Sonia first contacted me and said, what were some of your memories? The first memory that came to mind, and it probably isn't fair to Elaine, but when we were 8 or 9 years old, we were outside playing, and she found a little ring-necked snake. Now, they're a perfectly harmless little snake, but it's a snake, and she dropped it down my shirt neck. My neck, my shirt. and I still remember that. Another thing that I remember us doing as kids, Grandma Gibb had a patch of gooseberries. They were big gooseberries, and we would go out and pick them. Not for her delicious gooseberry cobbler, but it was a contest. You would pick gooseberries and put as many in your mouth as you could, and then you would bite down on them. And the person who didn't make a face, because they're very sour, the person who didn't make a face won the contest. I don't know how many of her gooseberries we run that way, but anyway. Elaine especially enjoyed the springtime. She enjoyed the leaves as they are right now when they first start to come out and they're that beautiful green. The red buds, the dogwoods, and of course we're going in the woods and finding the wild violets, the sweet williams, the mayflowers, the bloodroot, the other things. And of course, it's been mentioned already, the maple sugar trees. Uncle Earl would go out and tap the trees, hang a bucket on it, and then it was the kids' job to collect this sugar water, carry it up to the house, put it in a big container. When that container was full, or we had as much as we could get, they put it in a big pot over an open fire. And this was a big event for the school and the parents and everybody over the fire and making maple syrup. And this was a thing we looked forward to each year. And it was a lot of work carrying those buckets of sugar water up to the house every evening. I remember the one winter when we had an ice storm and the sidewalks were covered with a sheet of ice. And so Elaine and I were out there seeing who could slide the furthest on the ice. I don't remember now what happened, but I fell down somehow. And Uncle Earl took me to the emergency room, and they said I had a broken collarbone. But that was the part of play sometimes. Elaine really enjoyed playing in the woods, as we've already heard. Their house was ideal for doing this. To get to their house, the road out there in those days was West Boulevard. And it was kind of a narrow road. You turned the curve, then you turned in between the sweet locust trees and down a long drive until you got to the end, and there was a small house at the end. And then it was in the woods. This was in the country. And that's the way Elaine liked it. She was so upset when they put the subdivision in just north of their house. Now, you couldn't see the subdivision from their house. There was a gully in between, but that was her playground. It was not right. And then when they built Stadium Boulevard, that went right through her front yard. She lost her privacy. She lost her play places. There was a little cave down at the bottom of the hill that they filled in completely with fill dirt. All of this, and she was very upset with all of this. So Larry, Elaine, and I really had a lot of fun together in those years. But it was time for Elaine to graduate from elementary school and go off to high school. And she went to the boarding school at Sunnydale Academy in Centralia. Her roommate came home with her one weekend, And that was the first time that I met my future wife. Elaine and Ross also were dating at the academy, and they became husband and wife one day as well. Elaine always looked forward to the track and field events at Sunnydale, and she could run like the wind and usually won the events for her class. In those days, if you worked hard, you could work most of your way through academy. And Elaine worked in the cafeteria bakery. We had a friend call us here recently, and she said, Elaine taught me how to do the bakery because Elaine was going to graduate from Sunnydale and the next person had to learn how. She said, this person was a lifetime nurse. She said, working with Elaine in the bakery was the most fun job she had had in all of her employment years. Both of those girls could really make some good bakery stuff, but nothing compared to those sweet rolls on Friday. And I have to admit, some of the guys could not resist from breaking into the cafeteria sometimes and helping her with those. But when we grew up, finances were tight. There just wasn't a lot of extra money. And maybe to best explain that, when a candy bar was purchased, it was cut into equal pieces, and a piece was given to each member of the family. We just accepted that. That's the way it was done. Well, when we got to academy, we didn't have to share anymore. But somehow, Elaine could make a candy bar last all week. She would come in, open her books, reach in her drawer, take out the candy bar, take one bite, put it back in, and we really admired her willpower. I don't know whether this story is correct or not. A good chance it's not, but Elaine was saying one time that living in Kansas City after she and Ross were married, that there were days when she got home and thought, what am I going to have for supper? What am I going to have for supper? And she probably would procrastinate on that. And it was getting really time, and she still didn't have a plan. She would stick an onion in the oven. And when Ross came in the house, it smelled delightful. Elaine lost her battle with cancer, and I was thinking about death. And I like the way Jesus described death in John 11:11. When talking about Lazarus, he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to wake him up. And then when speaking about Jairus' daughter in Luke 8:52, Jesus tells the crowd that she's not dead, she's asleep. I like the feeling, the sound of asleep, much better than death. You know, Elaine loved to run as a girl, and I think she would have appreciated 2 Timothy 2:7-8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me in that day, and not only me, but also to all those who have longed for his appearing. We can look forward to seeing Elaine again. I remember Elaine for her beautiful singing and her ever-present smile. I will look forward to that day when we meet again. And when she awakens from that sleep, she's going to expect to see her family and friends there.
When I had asked for some of the favorite songs, it seemed like people really struggled to find one. I remember I think Mom probably wasn't Mom's, probably Grandma and Grandpa paid for piano lessons, and thankfully Pam and Larry actually probably gave me most of my piano lessons just so that she could have a pianist, because anytime someone was playing the piano, Mom wanted to sing. I didn't realize I was following in your footsteps, but it all makes sense now. And so when I asked, like, what are some of the songs that Mom would have wanted us to sing? There were so many. But for today, Pam, if we could do On Jordan's Stormy Banks. Andrew?
Elaine would be very sad to hear you sing that song like that. My dad, who preached all of his life, would stop the congregation just like I'm doing and say, folks, you're singing like a dirge. She'd be sad. I'm asking you to start that song again. Sing it like you mean it. Sing it like you plan to be there to meet her on Jordan's Stormy Banks.
Lean into it, Pam. Yeah! There. Whoa, there we go. On Jordan's stormy banks, our stand cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land, where my possessions lie. I'm bound for the promised land. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. O'er all those glorious tribulations from eternal day, where Christ the Son forever reigns and scatters night away. I'm bound for the promised land. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. Katie, our closing reading, please.
O heart, if someone should say to you, the soul perishes like the body, tell them, the flower withers, but the seeds remain.
Tom?
Let us pray. How shall we address you today, Lord? Our Redeemer, our Savior, our King, our brother, our God, and a whole bunch of others that I've missed. I want to thank you today, Lord, for your creation and what you have bestowed upon man and woman, and that we do, if we will accept it, claim brotherhood and sistership with you. So for all of us here today, Lord, I pray your blessing, and I pray for your hand in our lives, that we might all join together one day in that promised land. And we ask this in your name and for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. I want to say a special thank you to Sharon Andreassen for the beautiful slideshow. Hopefully you saw many of your faces in there at various points of her mom's life or familiar territory. And again, thanks to each person who helped with remembering her today and for sharing your memories. We are hosting whoever is willing to stay for dinner. We'll be having pizza delivered about 5:45 in the gym. But until then, please visit. You came here for a reason. There are many people that you love and have enjoyed spending time with over the years. Thank you so much for remembering Mom. And before you go, if you will please take a rose, those of you who can, as memory of Mom. Thank you.